And everyone, welcome to the 50th session of our International IVF Initiative. It is really a pleasure and an honor to be here and co-hosting with Dr. Maria Jose de los Santos. This session will be introduced with Maria, but before that I have to introduce Maria, and I think most of you know her very well. She started her career in '91 in the IVF laboratory of IVI Valencia. She received her PhD in biology from the University of Valencia in '96, and from '96 to '99 she carried out her postdoctoral fellowship in reproductive immunology at the Ferring Research Laboratory at the Harvard Medical School. That's a very well-known school. As a clinical Ashray and Asabir senior clinical embryologist and researcher, her main focus is to study embryo quality, embryo development, and in vitro embryo culture conditions. Currently, she is the director of the Clinical Embryology Laboratory at IVI Valencia and designated participant from Spanish government for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition of the Guide of Quality and Safety of Tissues and Cells for Human Applications of the European Council. That's a very serious thing. She has published over 50 original peer-reviewed articles in leading reproductive journals like Human Reproduction, Fertility, Sterility, and others. Wrote more than 20 different book chapters. De los Santos has been involved in teaching since her early career, imparting courses since 1996. And also, Maria is working at IVI, as I mentioned, and IVI has one of the largest egg bank in the world. So that's a disclosure for Maria, just like for me, the disclosure that I am working at RBA, but I am also associated with my egg bank or MEB. Maria, the microphone is to you.
Thank you, Peter. It's actually a pleasure to co-chair this session with you, with a good friend. So before to introduce the session, I also would like to introduce you, although I know everybody knows you. I don't think you really need an introduction, but anyway, for those that are pretty new in this field, I would like to talk about Peter. As he mentioned, he is the scientific and laboratory director of Reproductive Biologists Association in Atlanta. He is MD, but also he obtained a PhD at the Free University of Brussels back in 1997 on ICSI. Together with Dr. Chan, he developed a very efficient proprietary protocol for oocyte vitrification back in 2006, which was very important to establish the largest donor oocyte cryobank in North America. Peter, as everybody knows, is board member of several national and international professional societies. He was also the chair of Alpha Society, and he, of course, is the author of many publications, more than 200 publications, several chapters, book chapters, and 5 books. So, yeah, if you want me to initiate the session, Peter, or do you want to?
I can start. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you. So, you know, the first speaker is a good old friend of mine, Dr. Kamal Ahuja from London. And after completing his PhD studies at the University of Cambridge with Professor Sir Robert Edwards, Kamal Ahuja moved to London to head the Cromwell Hospital IVF program as its founding scientific director, where he remained for over 20 years. In 2007, he founded the GD Healthcare Group that owns and runs all London women clinics in the UK, as well as the London Egg Bank and the London Sperm Bank in central London. Kamal is a member of the development board of St. John's College, Cambridge, and the current chairman at the Reproductive Healthcare Ltd of United Kingdom. Kamal will talk about from egg sharing to egg banking. And Kamal, if you can please pull up your slides, share your slides, and start your presentation. It's a big honor to have you here. Thank you so much.
Can we get rid of this? Great. Thank you very much, Maria and Peter. It's a wonderful introduction, and delighted to be with you. Can I begin my talk by, first of all, thanking the leadership of the International IVF Initiative for coming up with such a wonderful idea, and also for giving me a chance to present some of my thoughts with you today. So thank you, and thank you all, those who have joined us in this presentation today. You will, following my presentation, there are 3 exceptionally wonderful presentations that you're going to hear. They're going to be talking an awful lot about the amazing things that are happening in the world of banking, particularly oocyte banking. And we're delighted that between Maria and Peter, they provide such powerful role as chairman, given their large association with huge banks globally. My story is going to be a little different, primarily because of my interests in the field in a certain way, that I've become fascinated with the art of policymaking, apart from being a hands-on embryologist. That was some time ago. But also, I think in the kind of environment in which we work in the UK, and I think I'll elaborate that in a bit. The most important thing is to introduce to you the concept of a London egg bank, which operates from 3 distinct sites: London, Cardiff, and Darlington, though the data that I'm going to be sharing with you today is largely derived from the London base, but equally exciting results we think are available from the other 2 centers as well. So there is no denying the fact that the demand for donor eggs has been increasing, and in many countries, the demand is such that the supply lines are stretched. And here is an example of how I see it. The data is a bit old, it's about 3-4 years old, but I don't think the numbers would have changed greatly. I think the disparities in the provision of donor eggs that exist is very much, you would agree, most of you are listening to this presentation, is a reflection of the cultural environment in which the regulatory structures are put together. And I think it's also a reflection of how innovative the clinics and the regulators are to meet certain level of demands that they see coming their way. So there's no denying again that in Spain, 1 in 3 cycles, according to the data that I have seen from the registries, suggests that the volume of egg donation activity is high. And this is because they were quick off the mark in Spain. I have visited many Spanish labs over the years, and I have enjoyed the friendships and I think the cultural exchanges we have had. But the important thing is that they were quick off the mark to look at the problem in the eye and come up with solutions. So very early on, they were able to resolve the differing opinions about anonymity and payment to donors. They were also able to quickly adapt to the technologies that gave them a head start. And as a consequence, I think it's a place where we all sort of look to for guidance and advice and help from time to time. The US is not far behind. Again, the culture is innovative. Compared to those two fascinating destinations, look at on the left-hand side of the slide. In the UK, I think although we are performing perhaps between 5 to 6% of the cycles involving donor eggs, it's only recently that we have reached those amazingly high levels. I think for many, many years, the first 20 odd years of my time here, having been involved in the UK in all my working life for the last 30 years, it rotated no more than between 1 to 2% of all the cycles that involve donor eggs. And I think it is those kind of disparities then determine as to how you behave and what you're allowed to do. We are in a highly regulated environment. And this is where I summarize where I think the rest of my talk is going to be. So the first 20 years, much of our focus remained on fresh eggs, although we were doing embryo freezing for many, many years, but never had the confidence to freeze eggs, unfertilized eggs. We resolved to doing something called egg sharing, and many of you will have become aware of it, but I'm very happy I've been asked to, and I'm very happy to share the thought processes that involved our association and our excitement about egg sharing. We enjoyed a lot of working, a powerful relationship with overseas clinics where eggs were more plentiful, and had very happy patients returning to us with wonderful news. But latterly, particularly in the last 6-7 years, I think we have switched completely to the use of frozen eggs in our egg donation program. And what I want to do is the next few slides, the next 10 minutes, to take you through the thinking behind and then the steps that we took in order to travel from a certain mindset to a new mindset, and hopefully conclude the presentation with the suggestion that we might be getting back to egg sharing in some form and shape, although these are early days. So what is egg sharing? I think for those of you who are not acquainted with the idea, we presented it to our regulator in the early 90s that given the restrictions and given the long waiting list and the lack of responses to our campaigns to find altruistic donors to come forward, perhaps this could be something very exciting. It's a patient-inspired initiative. It's an arrangement whereby qualifying in the sense of age, restrictions in terms of counseling, in terms of regular cycles, group of women can receive free of charge IVF treatment in return for anonymously donating a proportion of their eggs to a matching recipient. We presented some evidence that this was well received. We got the ethics approval, submitted to our regulator, the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority. They checked the law books and said, yes, this is permissible in the benefit in kind clause, so long as the HFA remain responsible and you remain responsible for the anonymity between donors and recipient, go ahead. So we did. We reported some of our early successes around about 94, 95. I think the media got wind of it, and that's when the troubles began. So it took nearly 20 years after that to resolve some of the fundamental controversies that became evident in the eyes of the media. The headlines are always scary, and we were at the receiving end for some of the worst headlines that I could have imagined at the time in my career. But they all fell into three distinct categories that I think we spent the next 10, 12 years trying to resolve. And because there were no other options, we were not allowed to pay donors. Egg freezing was a distant phenomena. Nobody had started to inspire those kind of ideas in the country yet. I was doing slow egg freezing and embryo freezing. The results were okay, but nothing like what we are doing now. I think the controversies surrounded around three aspects, and all really are in connection with the definition of money. And I think if you look at the first one, the donors may be coerced into sharing eggs. That means women are put upon, victimized individuals who may be coerced into sharing eggs that they would have otherwise not done had the treatment been available or affordable to them when they needed it. They also felt that the other objection was that perhaps the clinics, cleverly or otherwise, may favor giving better looking eggs, more mature eggs to recipients because they're paying the fees and the donors are receiving free of charge treatment. And finally, if the donors did not succeed and they particularly became concerned about the recipient having achieved success, they would be scarred for life. And these were powerful objections. We couldn't walk away from them. I think it was not easy for even the regulator to withstand the onslaught of those observations. They threatened to withdraw the approval of egg sharing that had previously been granted to us. So we were looking at a looming crisis. And this is what we did over the next few years. We looked at our results and we were satisfied that the donors are not inconvenienced or in any way shortchanged. We did not think they suffered, but we really needed to do more than that. And we've reached out to independent pollsters because our views were biased, or at least it was presumed to be biased. We reached out to collaborators who had a greater expertise in assessing the results, such as Susan Gollenbach's department at the University of Cambridge or the National Opinion Polls. And to cut the long story short, I think we began to present our results in a systematic way and began to enter into a debate that I didn't think when I was growing up as a young embryologist that I was going to be acquainted with the sort of vocabulary and the terminology that was becoming so central to my life. The important thing was that it led the HFEA to reach out and announce a public consultation to take place. And it did take place. And that's when members of the public became involved. And here is an example of the sort of endorsements that we began to receive. This is an endorsement from a source no less than the High Court Justice of the Royal Courts of London from the family bench. As far as Justice Johnson felt, this is a sort of a union that we should respect and indeed applaud. There's much more to it. Actually, the number of endorsements that we had at one stage we thought was greater than the number of patients we had. And that was helpful when the HFEA, on my birthday, may I say, announced that the egg sharing, instead of being banned or disallowed, would be allowed to continue, because they also concluded, looking at the evidence, that it was enormously beneficial to both sharer and recipients. It was also, they were also influenced by the argument that the egg sharers are not motivated by money, but by the desire for a baby. That was the statement attributed to the chair of the HFEA. So they were like blood donors. I think the results are profoundly more favorable than even that, but we are very happy to receive it. It took another 14 years for the HFEA to define as to how much we were allowed to pay in the form of expenses, which was capped at £750 per donor, not as a value for the gametes, but for the act of donation and for covering the expenses. Now, you would imagine this would be wonderful. I think at last, before anybody else could do anything, we have triumphed. And I think the early results were not so disappointing at all. If you look at the approval having been given in December 1998, within a few years, I think the number of centers, we were the only center in Swansea and another center in London registered for egg sharing with the approval of the HFEA. But within 5 years, there were something like 76 centers in the UK. And I think clearly it was on the move. Alas, that was not the case. If you look at the numbers according to the HFEA statistics, the numbers rose startlingly well, but then they started the decline. Even the payments that were introduced in 2012 did not really lift the curve upwards at all. And that was quite disappointing. So did we overestimate the quantum of altruistic intent amongst the egg sharers as the group that was championing for egg sharing? I think the answer was a little bit more subtle, and perhaps it lay elsewhere, not in us determining the level of altruistic intent for donors. And the answer lay really elsewhere when I said it's really overseas egg banks. And they were tremendously influential. It's all very well that you can write a smart study and a lovely paper, but you also have to persuade people to buy into it. So our recipients began to leave in large numbers. I think the shores of the UK, to go to places where eggs were plentiful, where the choice was greater, where the legislation was less restrictive. And I think by this time now, cheap flights, the access to internet, all those things were very easily available. And therefore, on the left-hand side of this slide, the countries such as the UK, France, and Germany, where the eggs were not so plentiful owing to the legislation or the restrictions, they began to travel widely to the countries and the destinations that had impeccable standards in providing care, and of course the choice that was absolutely wonderfully available. So I think this was the answer. As to this may have, perhaps did not give sufficient latitude for egg sharing to have its full impact, we will never know. But we didn't wait for us to find the results, because we neither had the resources nor the time. we decided to join the race. And here are sort of in one slide what we did at one of our own centers. We formed powerful and very enjoyable working relationships with a number of partner clinics in Ukraine, in Spain, and in the USA, and to a lesser extent in Cyprus as well. We had wonderful results, wonderful working relationships, but you know, it reached a stage where some years later in 2014, we decided that this wasn't the answer for either. We decided that we wanted to do something else, and the reasons are listed underneath. We terminated explaining to our partners as to why we were doing it. We gradually withdrew from those formal relationships that we had formed. And the one big reason was that the ethos of providing treatment with donor eggs was different. Although the patients were receiving their eggs and embryos elsewhere, we were still involved in looking after them, recruiting them, preparing them, and sending them abroad. And I think there was a kind of a disparity between those that were being treated locally and those that were traveling. For example, I think in the case of some of them, in 2005, identifiability of donors to the children born through donor eggs or donor sperm became a point of law. Now, if you have treatment here, identity is disclosed through the HFEA of the donor. If you have treatment elsewhere, I think we had cases where we couldn't satisfactorily answer their curiosities. It was also commercially not viable for a center to be so intricately involved. Media relations, we had some wonderful stories, but equally we had some poor stories as well. And increasingly, patients became aware of the potential of egg vitrification because even at the partner clinics, I think the language and the terminology and the vocabulary had started to change because the results with egg vitrification were so exciting. We having enjoyed this relationship, we felt that we had no choice but to adopt vitrification wholesomely as we could. And that we began to do in 2013 and 2014. Before I show you the results from what we have been up to over the last 7 years in the last part of my presentation, I think recently with Nick Macklin, I think we have written, he and I have written a short review about the hugely disruptive impact of vitrification on how we conduct ourselves in our therapies. There is no denying that whichever registry you look at, I think the freeze-alls have grown in stature and volume. Frozen eggs have grown in stature and volume. And of course, increasingly, the behavior of treatment has also changed as well. There's no need to travel as much as we could before. There's no need to wait and synchronize cycles. I think the costs have come down, and all these are powerful things. And I think we felt good about getting this review. So just the last part of the presentation, where do we stand now? This is the picture now. If I look at the last 7 years from our London center alone, I think the same picture exists in Cardiff and Darlington as well. I think the traditional egg sharing is very, very small part of what we do now. Though we have a huge emotional attachment with it, it's not something that's keeping us awake all night. We are more excited about 95% of the cycles now utilizing frozen eggs for donation. And that's the results I'm going to, the next few slides I'm going to quickly present. Wherever we have used fresh eggs, it's a very small 2 to 4% where we have provided treatment sort of using donor eggs within a lesbian relationship. We are recognized as a clinic where many of them come for treatment, and we're very happy to continue providing that. So as we asked our partner clinics when we were working in Spain and in Cyprus, etc., we felt that the sort of question that we asked of them when we were sending large number of patients there, if we were to now open our doors to partner clinics who would want to work with us, I think they would ask us the same question that we asked of the partner clinics in Spain and in the USA. And those questions were, who are your donors and how well they do in your labs? So here is a snapshot of the first 500 donors that we successfully recruited. This is about 2 years old. And all our donors are characterized like this. They are UK residents, well-educated, average age is 24, aware of their own fertility aspirations, but most importantly, dedicated to help others. That is the biggest driving force, just like egg sharers were. The core of practice of the HFA has provided very clear definitions for screening, counseling, and recruitment. And of course, we have worked hard to provide support for those who want to choose eggs from our catalogs. How well our donors are doing in our labs. So these are the results from our London center, and they're from 1,177 consecutive recipient cycles. Initially, 2-3 years, we had fewer cycles than we have in the last 2-3 years. Results from about just under 10,000 vitrified warmed eggs and blastocysts, and you can see about the pregnancy results. But if you look from left to right, we're quite gratified that the survival rates have remained pretty steady at about 95%, fertilization rates, blastocyst utilization rates, and of course, the implantation rates have been pretty steady. I think in most cases, the implantation rates, particularly the last 3-4 years, have been absolutely marvelous. We tend to only transfer a single blastocyst, particularly in the last 3 years. As a consequence, it is not surprising that nearly 80% to 90% of all our patients have surplus blastocysts stored frozen for later use. This is exciting us. I think these are the sort of parameters that persuaded us to join up with some distinguished banks when we were working with them overseas. And these are the sort of results we can now offer the partner clinics that we wish to work with in the UK as well. As the databases are built, we felt it's necessary for us to begin to really define what our bank's about. So the basic questions, like how many eggs will I need? At present, on our catalogs, the options exist to procure either 6 eggs or 10 eggs. Here are the results from when you'd have 6, 8, or 10 eggs. The sort of things that were done by the early pioneers, 5-7 years ago. We are quite happy with the results that we are getting. I think with increasing numbers, of course, you increase not necessarily the portion, but the volume of blastocysts that's available to us, and that enhances your ability to choose the best possible blastocysts, and that then gives you better results as well. I think these are the sort of things that will be of value to people who would, I think, begin to work with us, and we are increasingly within our own network of clinics. We have already trialed between Cardiff and London and Darlington, the logistics of transportation, and the results are very satisfactory. We're very happy with the way things are working. I think the partner clinics will also not fail to notice the concurrent increase in elective freezing cycles as well. If you look at the bottom line, the UK is still a low performer. Only 1.5% of cycles have elective freezing, according to the HFA report in 2018. It's probably doubled since then, but still, it's a pretty low number. But in our own clinic, as people have become aware of the possibilities of vitrification, the recruitments have become that much better, and I think we're seeing more and more people. So finally, I think to us, having reached this stage, there's a distinct possibility. I'd like to leave a thought with you for discussion, that it may well be that vitrification that saw of the initial challenge of egg sharing, ironically, may also cause its revival. What it means is that freeze and share IVF schemes, whereby you can have your eggs frozen for free in return for donating, instead of a matching recipient, donating your frozen eggs to the pool of donor eggs that are then available to somebody else. Now, motivations between egg sharers of the yesteryears, 20 years ago, and those that might be considering becoming freeze and share clients, not likely to be very different. The only difference would be that instead of having a fresh treatment cycle, I think they would be more interested perhaps in having a treatment cycle in a deferred manner at a time of their choosing. And that would be exciting. We think that that will enable people to have enhanced donor choices in countries like the UK, where the choices were more limited in the years gone by. But as time passes, hopefully we can open our doors to more partner clinics and more patients. I think I would like to again thank the organizers and end my presentation on that note, and then look forward to having some questions. Thank you very much.
Kamal, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. I have a question, but before I have that question, I just wanted to give a reminder to everyone that we ask every attendee that please ask your questions through the Q&A. So if you are hovering your mouse at the Zoom, then you can see at the bottom line a Q&A. If you click on it, you can open it up and you can ask your questions there. Also, if you miss the beginning of this presentation or any other presentations in the past or in the future, you can always watch the recording of this session or any other sessions that we had in the past. And you can find those sessions at the ivfmeeting.com. And the question, Kamal, you gave a fantastic overview, historical overview about UK and also about some other parts. You know, I think it's important for all of us to remember that egg donation in many countries are not so very easy. You know, I think in a few countries like United States, probably Spain, you know, maybe Czech Republic, it is much easier to get donor eggs than most of the other countries. Would you please, just in less than 1 minute, describe that, you know, what are the majority of the countries, how is the egg donation or the donation at all, gamete donation is happening, you know, is it available at all? It's restricted completely. Do anybody has to pay for it, or how is it? Just to get a general idea.
Peter, what an important point you raise. I think you know, the countries that are ahead, as you identified, will remain ahead. Not because of the huge altruistic intent quantum there, but just simply because they've sorted out the logistics. I'd like to hope that eventually they will be leveling out, but that's not going to happen in the next 2 to 4 years. It'll take longer, but eventually I think that technology is a great leveler. I'd like to think that people catch up, and eventually I think a certain amount of diminution of overseas travel would happen, but I think the results will call the tune. And I think, again, we follow you. I remember visiting you, Peter, 7 years ago. You were very kindly hosting me in Atlanta with my team, and it's been a long journey, but it's been fun watching you doing what you're doing, what others have done. And I think from the UK point of view, I think the restrictions to some extent will remain. I don't think they're going to disappear quietly. But nonetheless, within that, I think the technology is now at a stage where we are able to create some innovative solutions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kamal. And Maria, the microphone is to you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I'm very pleased to present our next speaker, Wayne Caswell. In the meantime, he gets ready for the presentation. I would like to introduce a little bit about his life, his CV. Wayne Caswell is currently holding the position of Senior Laboratory Technical Director for Donor Egg Bank USA, which is part of Genetically Life Science. In this position, he is actually responsible for training and quality operations of the oocyte vitrified and worm as part of the egg bank, which is very important, of course. He served as an army officer for many years, earning the rank of captain. Oh my God, this is very interesting, very exciting. Well, he did the undergraduate and graduate studies at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and also Woodsboro, Massachusetts, and Eastern Virginia Medical School. He also established as an expert in oocyte vitrification in Irvine Scientific Company. Now he's a very strong leader, and he is able to give consistent results with their expertise in the clinics where he works. Wayne also has a lot of experience as a speaker, as he has spoken in conference in US, Europe, South Africa on the topics of assisted reproduction and cryopreservation. He is actually also currently on the board of directors for Society for Reproductive Biologists and Technologists as a part of ACRM. So it's a very great pleasure to present Wayne. He is going to present discipline quality initiatives to drive superior outcomes. So Wayne, when you get ready, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking the I3 organizers for putting together this session and giving me the opportunity to participate. Also, thank you to all of you for taking the time to join in. So Donor Bank USA is a part of Generate Life Sciences. I'm an employee of Donor Bank USA. Generate Life Science also has in its holdings California Cryobank and Cord Blood Registry, which is the largest stem cell provider in the United States. I have no other disclosures or conflicts of interest. To start off the talk, I want to start with quality begins with training and robust protocols. We'd all agree this is really important. I like to break it down into different sections. So in the egg banking operations, we want to start out with the pre-donation side of things. Good screening of donors. This will be covered by Corey in a later session. Clinical, ethical, and psychological screenings, very well covered by Kamal just a moment ago. Identifying and utilizing the proper stimulation regimen and administration of the trigger at the proper time. At time of donation, you have to look at safe collection of oocytes and donor management. Additionally, proper handling of the oocytes, scoring and vitrifying, which will be covered by Birol in a few moments as well. Post-donation, many things to consider here and to make sure you're tracking. Proper storage and handling of the vitrified oocytes, critical. Shipping and handling from the cryobank to the warming location. You need to have a robust and consistent warming protocol. And I can't really emphasize this enough, but the difference between vitrifying embryos and eggs is quite substantial. Oocyte vitrification is much more sensitive and requires an extreme attention to detail to really maximize results. Let's talk a little bit about quality systems in general. When you look at the yin and yang of quality, it breaks down to quality control, which is looking at the detection side of the operations, and quality assurance, which is focused much more on the prevention side. If we look at a bottom-up approach, the detection part, quality control, is really measuring your temperatures, inspecting your equipment, making sure everything is ready to go, finding and fixing mistakes. Where the quality assurance part of things is really looking at identifying errors and issues, investigating them, learning from them, and applying corrective action to strive for zero defects. And this is all part of a total quality management approach. So beyond quality control and quality assurance systems, what else can be done? Well, hope in any fashion is never a good plan. It would make no sense for us to do everything really good and send out the oocytes and hope they'll perform well. So therefore, training and having good protocols really is not enough. Surveillance and data are really key to make good decisions. At Donor Bank USA, we doggedly pursue our data, and we have a 90% rate of data return. And this is really critical knowledge to make good and timely decisions. So what are some of the things you should focus on tracking? Well, survival rate of oocytes is very important, but it's not really a primary metric I'd recommend. We really like to focus on blastocyst rates and usable blastocyst rates as the primary laboratory indicator. But laboratory indicators are really not enough. You need to also focus on clinical indicators, such as clinical pregnancy rate, miscarriage rate, ongoing pregnancy rate, and live birth rates. These are of critical importance because it's really what your partner clinics and ultimately your recipients are going to be most focused on. Now, this table is a little busy, but I want to show you this is one of the ways that we look at our freezing embryologists and how do we track their performance. So this is actually showing some of my freezing embryologists ranked by clinical performance. We try to establish a little bit of competitiveness. We think it's healthy, everyone strives to do a good job and strives for excellence. So it's good to have a healthy competitive environment where people are going. So we do share this information. It's one of the tools we use to track and drive excellence. This table here is one of the report cards we would send to one of our partner clinics, one of our thaw clinics. So let me orient you a little bit to this table. Up here is the date range. We establish a 1-year shifting frame rate. The purpose for that is so we have a large enough data set that the N can be meaningful, yet we're not holding people hostage with old data. So we try to move this frame rate along to represent a much more consistent and current data set of what they're doing. This top part of the table here focuses on laboratory indicators, whereas this bottom table is presenting and focusing on the clinical indicators. We provide the data for each thaw tech within that institution, give them their average performances, and we always give them the data of the network average during the same time period. So we want to be able to give them their own data and let them look and see how they're doing against the rest of the partner networks participants to see where they are. But we always strive for excellence. So we also provide them with our top 10 percentile. The top clinic right here breaks down some of the highest performing clinics. None of us are striving to be good enough. We're all striving for excellence. So it's good to show some of the higher performing groups to give people things to shoot for. This is another tool we use. So in this instance here, we may have identified a clinic whose clinical rates are a little bit below network average, and we engage in a conversation. This data table is showing a sibling lot or sister lot comparison. So the warming site we're talking about, this blue line here, is looking at the survival rate of the lots that have been shipped to that group, whereas the orange group shows the sibling lots that would have been shipped out from the same donors to other participants in the programs. And in this group, you can see that this group is performing as well and maybe even exceeding the sibling lots at other clinics. Unfortunately, when we look at the clinical results, we see a little deviation here. So whereas their laboratory indicators are strong, their clinical indicators are not matched up to the sibling lots here. So this would bring up a conversation that would be, maybe we need to look at some of the clinical things, transfer technique, endometrial prep, luteal phase supports, in a way to positively address these concerns and help and move the dial to better performance. Talking back about our freezing group here, we also established an oocyte vitrification proficiency program within our freeze clinics. So one of the things we've noticed, and many of you have probably noticed as well, the vitrification protocols are subject to a little protocol drift. The way I usually discuss this is the protocols are kind of easy, and that's the trap, where if you're not paying attention to detail, things can creep into your performance and your the way you operate. And none of these things are ever intentional, but as people get more comfortable with the protocols, like loading on the devices, we've learned that we may have to retrain and rework with people just to get them back to a maximum operation. So we've instituted the quarterly oocyte submission for proficiency. In this way, we can pick up subtle variations in the protocol before too much time has passed. So what do I mean here? If we only relied on egg freezing, donor matching, shipping, warming, and results, a large period of time may go by between the time those eggs were frozen and we actually get the results. In that long period of time, if drift has crept into somebody's performance, it'll show up in the results, and maybe a lot of eggs might actually be frozen in less than optimal methodology. So we've instituted this quarterly proficiency so we can have eggs submitted routinely and just watch for those drifts, make sure everything is really rock solid. Another important part of this proficiency is to look at all aspects of the system. Labeling, very important part of the system. We need to make sure our labels are consistent, they're holding up to liquid nitrogen, they're legible. So by doing this proficiency, we're also getting oocytes submitted internally and we can see how that clinic is labeling and everything is going. I mentioned protocol here, not only the vitrification protocol, but it gives us an opportunity to test our warming protocol. In doing so, we can look and evolve and adapt, make sure we're introducing new developments and getting better. Shipping and handling is a very, very important part of the distribution of oocytes, cannot be minimized. So this gives us the opportunity to also test our shipping and handling system separate from oocytes being shipped to clinics and that are involving an actual recipient. So it gives us the opportunity to see how we're loading our devices and the goblets, making sure there's no issues in the shipping and handling. So in conclusion, a couple things I just want to go over. You want to consider all aspects of the egg banking process. So as I mentioned before, look at pre-donation, donation, and post-donation events to make sure you're looking at every possible thing that may be contributing to your process. Design quality systems which target and track performance. Identify good indicators, identify good benchmarks. And once you're finding that you're reaching your benchmarks rather easily, it's time to move the goalpost. So if you're finding that all your clinics are routinely reaching a benchmark, then you really want to increase the standard and really challenge the system. Again, we don't want to be good enough. We always want to be the best. You want to make your decisions based on strong data. So in a past life, I was an Army officer, and I was actually a scout. So in there, we learned about reconnaissance and how important information is to go up the chain to make sure you're making good decisions. And knowledge really is power. If you don't have good knowledge and good information, you can't make good decisions. Also, you should strive to incorporate proficiency in all levels of your operations. Find ways to test and monitor all aspects of performance. And we find by managing quality as tightly as we do, we're able to offer a live birth guarantee option to a lot of our clinics, where we take all the risk because of the confidence we have in our donor egg processes. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Wayne. I enjoyed very much your presentation. You have brought very key elements actually on the identification program. You have emphasized in your quality to control, quality assurance, proficiency training, which is, I think is very important to provide a service of quality, which is all about. So all the stakeholders, clinics, patients, and even the regulatory bodies will benefit of this straight way of working. So I really enjoy your presentation. So I really like the idea of sharing with other clinics the data, so the clinics know whether they are performing in a average or high or low level. But I wonder, how can you see those confounding factors? How you can control that there is no other confounding factors, and maybe clinics are very worried and they shouldn't be worried about? Is there any way that you can control?
Absolutely. Variability is the enemy of quality, and there's variables in every clinic which are hard to account for. So that's a very astute and absolutely true representation. We try to work very collaboratively and very transparently with our clinics that we work with, and work together to try and identify and solve those options. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are out of our control from clinic to clinic. But that's one of the things I think that's important, that as an egg bank, we all share the same goals. We all share the same goals of outstanding outcomes. So as long as we come to any conversation in that manner, we all strive for the same goals. We usually can find common grounds and ways to help each other. We also find it helpful to provide this data to clinics, because sometimes, you have your own data set. You can see how you're performing. It's good to share some multi-center data so that they can see, how am I doing against my peers and against other clinics? And we find that very empowering and very valuable.
Yeah, it's a privileged place. I mean, to be able to compare between clinics, and it's very good. Well, thank you very much, Wayne, for your excellent presentation. And Peter, I think it's your turn.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic presentation, Wayne. So the next speaker is Burke from Cryos International, and it is my real great pleasure to introduce to everyone Corey. Corey has worked in the reproductive industry for over 20 years. Over the years, he has run embryology, research, and diagnostic laboratories. In 2014, he joined Cryos International as tissue bank director and established Cryos International First Donor Egg Bank. As tissue bank director, he is responsible for the safety and quality of donors and their gametes, as well as the scientific direction and quality assurance of the Cryos International egg banks around the world. In 2005, Burke was trained in the relatively new technology of vitrification of embryos and oocytes. This technology produced increased survival rates with embryos and for the first time allowed oocytes to be effectively and efficiently cryopreserved. Over the next 14 years, he started several fertility preservation programs and worked as a training consultant for a large commercial donor egg bank. He has vitrified tens of thousands of oocytes, resulting in hundreds of children. Serving on the American Association of Bioanalysts Legislative Committee, 2 FDA workshop committees, and the Scientific Advisory Board of a large biotechnology company, Burke is an industry thought leader. It's a big pleasure to have you here. If you want to share your slides, and please go ahead with the presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Peter. Okay. Well, sorry, let me back up one, if I can figure that out. Wow, I clicked a whole bunch of too many times. Hold on 1 second.
That's all right, no worries.
And I do want to say thank you, Peter. You may not know this, but I actually trained in your lab back in, I think, 2006, 2007. And it's been so long, I don't know if you remember that or not, but you were a great part of my career in that regard.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I'm here to talk about donor screening during a global pandemic. You know, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and this is a big topic for us. So I got to thinking as we started doing this presentation that really donor screening may not be the best title for this. It's really more about donor retention, gaining new donors, and keeping the donors that we have in today's world. Finding donors in 2020 is a challenge. You know, maintaining them is just hard. COVID keeps the donors away. We're down in donor applications 60%. We have 60% fewer applications. We have 50% fewer sperm donor applications. And I think other banks can verify this, and maybe some of you are not aware of this, but banks on average take about 3 to 5% of all the applications they receive. So, you know, that's a big issue for us. We have that many fewer applications, meaning we will ultimately have that many fewer donors, at least going forward. Hopefully this situation will change. And we'll talk about that a little bit down the line here. And, you know, also the fact that we were shut down for quite a while, you know, in some areas are still not able to attract and process donors. You know, due to the shutdowns, they can't do this. And I would say all banks are struggling to keep up with the current demands. So what's changed? That's the big question. What's changed? Well, screening wise, regulatory, not a lot has changed, but you know, we have different things that have changed. We have the CDC precautions, we have the WHO precautions, we have, you know, all the local and national precautions that are out there. We have to use extra PPE, we have to use social distancing, plexiglass dividers, face coverings, temperature checks, risk questions, vaccines. But these are all things that aren't exclusive to IVF or egg banks or any of that. You know, you go to a doctor's office, you still go through the same checks. You go to most offices, you still go through this process to get inside. So, you know, that's different, but it's not different exclusively to us. So what do the regulations say? What do we have to do regarding COVID? What do we have to do? Well, the FDA says the following. They do not recommend using laboratory tests to screen asymptomatic tissue donors. It's a question that we get, and I'm sure most banks get the same things. Are you screening donors? Well, yes, we are, but no, we're not testing asymptomatic donors. And it's not believed that that is something that is necessary that we should be doing. Beyond that, the FDA has said, okay, the responsible person needs to make a decision about eligibility of the tissue donor. Based on the information available at this time, establishments may wish to consider, and that's an important phrase, may wish to consider, whether in the past 28 days prior to tissue recovery, the donor has cared for, lived with, or otherwise had close contact with individuals diagnosed or suspected of having COVID, been diagnosed with having COVID, or had a positive diagnostic test, but never developed symptoms. The reason I say it's interesting that the FDA states that may wish to consider, for those of you who work in the United States and understand the FDA regulations, when they say you may wish to consider, they generally mean you must consider this before proceeding with the donors. So every bank is asking basically these questions. So just note that if you're outside of the US and the FDA is saying something that you have an option, you really don't have an option. Anyway, and then I put this next line in here because there's so much misunderstanding going on surrounding the pandemic. I like to say we don't know what we don't know about it. But the FDA has made a statement about vaccines. They say that it's out there. They've been given emergency use authorization. And based on the information available at this time, those who have received non-replicating, inactivated, or RNA-based COVID-19 vaccines are not precluded from donation. Okay? And that would be pretty much expected because the vaccine manufacturers have stated that there seems to be no effects to reproductive health. It's interesting that we will see in the next slide that there's still some questions about donating after the vaccine. So ESHRA says basically the same thing that the FDA does. They say, a symptomatic donor should be deferred if they have In the preceding days, the donor has continuous cough or temperature above 37.8 degrees. They can be deferred for 28 days. And again, here's another little thing to point out. The donor can donate after 28 days from full recovery. The problem is, what is full recovery? Many people are finding with COVID, even though they are testing negative, the effects of the disease carry on for some time. So, that's another interesting note, is that I don't think ESHRA knows exactly how to define recovery. I don't think the FDA knows how to define recovery, but that's what they're telling us to work with, recovery. They basically say the same thing about asymptomatic donors as the FDA does. Basically says, government advice government advice about who should self-isolate should be considered, including the implications this may have on the donation process. It's basically saying asymptomatic patients, we're not going to do much about them. Use your best judgment. Best judgment is always the one that can get us into trouble. If you see the last statement here is their version of the vaccine. It says, in men and women who have received the vaccine, it seems prudent to postpone assisted reproduction treatments for at least a few days after the completion of the vaccine. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but to me, that's not a very scientific statement. The fact that it says seems prudent to postpone assisted reproduction, it doesn't say who it seems prudent to or the reasoning for it. But it just goes to, as an example, to the fact that we don't know what we don't know. And the big issue here is it's not just us, it's everybody. It's the regulatory agencies as well as everybody else. Okay, so all that said, that's what the regulatory agencies say in general about COVID. But what does the literature say? Well, we know that there has been a number of studies looking at ovaries and testicle tissue, and we know that they have testicles and ovaries both have the ACE2 receptors, which theoretically make them susceptible to the virus. I could find no literature on anyone finding the virus in oocytes. There may be some. If any of you know it, please send it to me. I'd love to see it. But I've searched high and low and can't seem to find anything regarding eggs having virus on. What I've posted here is mainly about sperm, because sperm, there's been a lot more research that's been done. You know, sperm is certainly a much easier thing to research than eggs. Eggs are, they're more difficult to get, and there's a lot more involved with egg research, but sperm's pretty easy to look at. And looking at the literature, and early on we had an article come out by Lee and his associates, and it stated clinical characteristics and results of semen test among men with coronavirus disease 2019. This was published in JAMA, a very respectable journal. It was very interesting. If you read the study, you would see that there's some questions as to collection methods. In the original paper, they were mentioning things like people who are too ill to provide a specimen, testicular biopsies and things like that. But, I think most people question the results of this study because subsequent studies have not shown the same results. Following that, we've seen several come out, and I've just put here two that I've posted here that look at men recovering from COVID. So people who are no longer testing positive and looking at those who are now negative. And of course, they did not find any virus in the semen of men. Then we have a Greek group here, and I'm sorry for all you Greeks in the audience. I really can't pronounce this last name. There's far too many A's in it for me, but I think it's Caswell or something of that nature. But anyway, they actually did a good study, and they looked at a number of men that had an acute infection with COVID, and they also found no evidence of infection in sperm produced by those patients. Now we did our own study that's actually out for publication now, and we also did the same thing. We looked at a bunch of individuals who were infected with COVID. And the results were none of them were returned as positive. There was no trace of virus in the specimens. So the literature is kind of backing up everything that the FDA is saying, although the FDA had the statements out before the literature was out. But it appears to us that eggs and sperm are not affected by COVID. So now we don't know about the long-term effect of it. That's a whole nother issue. We may see a long-term effect to people, but that's a whole nother story. So again, I say, what's changed? Well, again, nothing regulatorily has changed. We don't have to do anything really differently when we're screening donors. Again, at Cryos, and I can't speak for other locations, but with our egg donors, we do test them, even though they are asymptomatic. We test them before they start medication, and then we test them again 2 days prior to the retrieval. It's only to give the 2 days prior to retrieval is to give the operating staff, the people doing the retrieval and everything, a little bit of peace of mind that the patient doesn't have COVID. But doing a test 2 days ahead of time doesn't mean that somebody hasn't turned positive in the meantime. So I mean, the biggest thing that we're looking at today is a lack of donors, and it's going to eventually show up in I wouldn't say a shortage of donors available, because as a large bank, and a number of people here are involved with large banks, we have a lot of donors, but we're not taking the donors in the door that we once were. So in the coming year, I think we will see somewhat of a sperm and egg shortage. I don't like to say it like a shortage, but just meaning the number of donors that we'll see that are available will probably be much, much less until we get past this COVID crisis. Changes that are not due to regulations are the things that are affecting things. Mandated lockdowns, like I spoke about in the beginning, they have a big impact. And places like London, they're locked down. I'm not sure exactly what level of treatment they're allowed to do, but lots of places are not doing treatments anymore, or certainly are not doing donors anymore, just because of the COVID situation. In the U.S., a big factor for us has been schools are switching to online classes, and it should not be a big secret to anybody. We tend to base ourselves around colleges because that's the ideal donors for us, being sperm or egg donors. You know, they're obviously in college, they're college educated, they're the proper age and everything else. So, you know, that's been a big factor in getting donors. And then the last thing that I'd like to talk about here is fear. I think that we have a lot of fear with the donors. You know, they're not showing up. And the same thing is, I'm hearing the same thing from doctors' offices, either, you know, personally, and I also hear it on the news all the time, that people aren't going into doctors' offices today because they're afraid that they could get COVID. And, you know, I can see in my own mind people saying, oh my gosh, I don't want to go into a sperm bank right now. That seems like a very good place to catch COVID. You know, probably not the case, but I think fear is really driving our donor numbers down. Conversely, I will say that the sales for everybody that I've spoke with, you know, people are using donor sperm, they're using donor eggs, but the problem just seems to be that we're not getting the donors in the door. And I believe that's all I have for you today. Happy to answer any questions or anything else.
Thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation, very useful. Just one very quick question, you know, regarding returning egg donors. Is there a guideline or restriction? You know, how many times a donor can donate? Is the number of donation cycles or the number of children? And then how, if you can, you know, track a donor that comes to your place donating 5 times and then goes to another egg bank donating another 5 times. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that is a great question, Peter. Okay, so for return donations, that also varies by your locations. Europe has different standards than the US has. The ASRM sets a guideline of 6, no more than 6 oocyte retrievals per donor. Personally, we don't get that high. We'll stop at 4 usually, but we'll do 3 or 4. But 6 is the limit. Again, that's not regulatory. That's just the suggestions from ASRM. So others may be doing more than that. The other question of offspring, that also is a big issue that we all struggle with. In the US, we don't have a registry that's set up to keep that information. Places like the UK, they have a very tight registry, and we know everything that comes out of Europe. But you know, a lot of the things, and for the people listening, I'm gonna say this: if you're using a donor bank, please report your results back. It is very important to us that we get results back from all the sperm that's sent out, all the eggs that are sent out. But it's always a question we're struggling to keep up with. And then to your question about how do we stop somebody from going to another bank? You know, that's probably the biggest and best question you asked. Sadly, we don't have a way other than asking the donors themselves. We have a policy of not accepting a donor that's gone to another bank. The problem is there's no registry of donors, so we have no way of truly finding out if they've donated at another bank. And you know, I know there's been a couple of times that I've been contacted by other banks saying, you know, we think we're sharing a donor, and you know, we find out about it and we can take care of it from there. But you know, just finding out initially is very difficult. And anybody has a suggestion how we can, you know, definitively define if somebody has been a donor somewhere else, that's a big question for us. You know, the best we can do is ask them. We hope they're being honest. You know, we are able to do other things, like we do background checks, you know, criminal records and education wise. But, you know, those background checks don't include if you've gone to another bank. And the fact that donors are anonymous in terms of, you know, we have anonymous and non-anonymous donors, but they aren't registered with their name that they can put out and share with other banks. So we do have some work to be done there. And I don't know the answer to the question of how we will stop people from going to other banks. And then, of course, there's the whole gray market situation where people are selling sperm on Craigslist or whatever, you know, websites that they're on that are not actually coming from banks. And that's another big issue too. You know, do we have donors who are doing that? I don't know of any, but I can't swear to you that there aren't people doing that as well.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Maria, microphone is to you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, Corey, very interesting presentation. I enjoyed it very much as well as the other one. But last but not least, we would like to introduce Birol Aydin. He's the lab director of scientific advisor at Ovogene Egg Bank. He has a lot of experience, Birol, 13 years of working experience in many countries all over the world, from Australia to Sweden, Georgia, Cyprus, Ukraine. So you have a lot of experience. And also I can see here that you have helped to set up many IVF centers, 10 IVF centers over the Czech Republic or North Macedonia. You also have a lot of experience in donor egg banking and oocyte cryopreservation. So you are going to talk about this issue, this specific topic. So maximizing donor egg efficiency and the use of artificial intelligence and genetically certified oocytes. Birol, it's your turn, whatever you feel.
Thank you very much for the organization. Give me a chance to share our experience, and thank you all for joining us. While egg donation starts to become much more active in IVF nowadays, and egg banks start to get much more responsible to increase their quality, to increase their morphological assessment criteria, and also to implement advanced technologies. So while we are trying to build an egg bank, the first thing we are trying to get strict morphological criteria for oocyte assessment. So basically, first thing what we are looking to cumulus oocyte complex morphology. While cumulus oocyte complex morphology directly may affect survival rate, there is no evidence to find direct effect for fertilization rate or blastocyst outcome, but for survival rate, it's an important criteria. When we talk about a zona pellucida, thickness of zona pellucida have a direct effect during the micromanipulation, also for the survival rate. So we try to avoid thick zona pellucida, or if there is some kind of anomaly or defect on a zona pellucida. So perivitalian space is a really important, especially during the vitrification, while cryoprotectant composition is getting much more higher if perivitalian space is large. So we try to avoid large perivitalian space or any kind of anomaly, or there is a non-perivitalian space oocytes. First, polar body appearance is a really important for us. Firstly, it shows maturity, and then morphology of the polar body has a direct effect also for euploid rate of the blastocyst and quality of the blastocyst. So oocyte shape also is important factor for us, and we are considering for the morphological selection when we choose oocyte for egg banking. Meiotic spindle location, it's not a very common, but it's a very advanced technology. So meiotic spindle location determination is a really important, while it's giving a high quality of the blastocyst rate if we find out the meiotic spindle location and determination before freezing. Granulated cytoplasm, of course, most of the embryologists can determine that under microscope, but while we try to get a direct result for the cytoplasmic activity, we start to use artificial intelligence. On next slide, I will try to talk about. So granulation on the central located granulation on the cytoplasm also is important, what we are following before to choose oocyte for egg banking. And time-lapse activity. So we are using a time-lapse activity directly connected with artificial intelligence to find out the best oocyte for the egg banking. So of course, we can see many different oocyte quality, even with a well-selected donor. Still, we can find a perfect quality oocyte, but still we can find also low quality oocyte. So how we are trying to analyze and avoid the low quality oocytes, of course, senior embryologist assessment is the first thing, but still there are advanced technologies of the artificial intelligence and get a really high result for the better survival rate and better blastocyst rate. So when we check the zona pellucida in donor oocyte, high zona birefringes is really important, because when we get high zona birefringes, when we use special meiotic spindle software, we find out that better pregnancy rate and implantation rate than low zona preferences. So prior freezing for egg banking, we try to determine zona preferences, while if there is a low zona preferences, we avoid for egg banking and we use only for the fresh donation cycle. Meiotic spindle determination, also we are using as advanced technologies while we are choosing oocyte for egg banking. So abnormal meiotic spindle, as you know, affect directly chromosomal configuration and increase aneuploidy rate of oocyte as a complex aneuploidy. Also, each donor oocyte are observing before vitrification process and location of spindle captured by time-lapse camera, which has a special optic, and we navigate the local place of the meiotic spindle if prior egg banking. So as we determine meiotic spindle, between determined meiotic spindle and non-determined meiotic spindle, in day 5 and day 6, we can see directly at least a 10% of difference on the blastocyst rate. While of course this is a question, what will bring advantage to find a meiotic spindle localization for customer clinics which getting oocyte from egg bank. We try to get an algorithm, so we connect the artificial intelligence and spindle software directly to time-lapse camera, and we try to get such image which we can give our customers direct location of the oocyte in the meiotic spindle. So they can determine that and they can avoid still possible damage during sperm injection to meiotic spindle. Mostly meiotic spindle take a place closer to polar body or 6 o'clock position under the polar body. But most of the time still we can see the meiotic spindle as 3 o'clock position, and many embryologists as a favor to use a 3 o'clock position for sperm injection. So how we are using artificial intelligence for the donor oocyte selection? Of course, we try to develop an algorithm, and we try to use a similar algorithm as you see on this study. We give a different parameter for the diameter of the oocyte, the diameter of the ooplasm, diameter of the polar body. So this reference value can keep in the artificial intelligence. When we put 20, 30 different donor oocyte under time-lapse camera, so artificial intelligence just capture them and try to measure from the different parameters, so like polar body, diameter of the oocyte, zona pellucida thickness, perivital space, and then compare directly with reference values. And it can say us of which oocyte have a really quality one, and we can consider to freeze for egg banking. So other oocytes, of course, we are using them for the fresh donor cycle. So only quality one oocyte, which determined by artificial intelligence, is going to be used for egg banking. So how artificial intelligence is doing a donor oocyte selection? So as under the time-lapse, active time-lapse camera, which has a special optic and determine also cytoplasmic composition. So artificial intelligence can detect directly the damage, possible damage in the polar body on the zona pellucida or cytoplasm. So it can give us a main picture, so which we can find out where is the exact damage or morphological problems. And then which oocyte has a totally quality one by artificial intelligence. We can just choose them, select them, and still also we can give our customers clinics, so measurement of the oocyte and diameter, even active time-lapse videos during the vitrification process. So this is the algorithm of artificial intelligence, how system is working. So system is working directly mathematical calculation. Diameter of the cytoplasm, inner diameter of zona pellucida, outer diameter of the zona pellucida, thickness of zona pellucida, and size of perivital space by calculate by the machine learning with a different parameter. Even if in the laboratory there are different embryologists, so each of them can send this data to direct it to artificial intelligence by the time-lapse camera, and artificial intelligence can collect all this image and can find out totally high-quality oocytes for egg banking. So this is the artificial intelligence efficiency between the embryologist and artificial intelligence user. So as you see, when we use the embryologist, senior embryologist morphological selection, even with strict selection criteria, so almost a 10% difference between artificial intelligence and senior embryologists. So mostly, if we are using this embryologist selection, as a 10% of these oocytes we will use for egg banking. But with artificial intelligence, we avoid them and we use for the fresh donor cycle. So they are not going to be an egg bank. There is a not big difference for the grade 2 and grade 3 oocytes, but still grade 1 oocytes is a really important to select for us to give a high chance to patients while they are trying to buy limited lot in the egg. So they are trying to 6 or 8 eggs. So every egg for them is a potential blastocyst. So also we believe that artificial intelligence selected donor egg can directly affect the euploid embryo rate, while artificial intelligence still can get information for the polar body quality and also cytoplasmic activity. As you see on our study, of course, still we didn't publish while we don't have, this is a new technology and still we don't have live birth rate. So I guess end of year, we will be ready for the publishment. So with artificial intelligence selected donor rate, already 65% of euploid embryo rate we find out. But for the senior embryologist selected donor rate, the two different embryologists has two different euploid blastocyst rate. What about cryo-donor egg efficiency? So between different clinics and the supplier clinic of egg bank, there are differences for the survival rate, fertilization rate, and blastulation rate. Because of the main reason, always a supplier clinic has a standard protocols, standard embryologists, and of course, the high quality of the system which they built for the egg banking. That's why this directly affects the result. Also, the pregnancy rate, that there is the same situation. So supplier clinic has a bit more pregnancy rate, clinical pregnancy rate than customer clinics. So if we talk about the polar body biopsy and testing, this is a really new and advanced technology. So following the whole genome amplification of the first polar body cell, we are performing an euploid screening using the next generation sequencing. So NGS-based analysis method from first polar body is an extremely reliable method for PGT-A examination of the oocytes. So our main idea was to take a first polar body activity and to determine an euploid screening for the first polar body and to find out euploid oocyte. So the genetic structure of the oocyte also directly affects the pregnancy success of the polar body testing. And this mainly gives a big advantage to avoid mitochondrial mutation risks while we are fertilizing euploid oocytes. So when is the right time to do polar body biopsy? Of course, the spindle breach is a present for an only limited time period, which is usually 1 to 2 hours after the extrusion of the first polar body. And we are trying to use this gap. So what we are doing after the oocyte pickup, mostly we decrease the waiting time for the denudation. Almost a maximum 30 minutes we are waiting for denudation and then denudate the oocyte. And then we are passing it directly for polar body biopsy. When we done the polar body biopsy with a small zona drilling, after that, for the vitrification process, we are trying to keep long culturing period of the oocyte. So almost a 1 and 1.5 hour, we are waiting for the culturing of the oocyte, and then we go directly vitrification process to avoid any kind of risk and damage for the degeneration. So this is the outcomes for polar body NGS testing. While we find out an interesting result when we make euploid oocyte rate from the different age group, of course, according to age of age group, so donor age groups, euploid rate of the oocyte is changing. So when we have 77% donor group 25 to 29 years old, we got already 89% of euploid embryo rate. So how we done this organization? So firstly, we got a biopsy from each oocytes. We tested polar body NGS, and then we freeze this oocyte by vitrification method, and then we thaw. After thawing, we fertilize them and we create a blastocyst, and then trophectoderm biopsy and NGS testing. So we find out a totally matching between euploid oocyte and euploid blastocyst rate. So that shows us still polar body NGS testing is a big advantage to avoid any kind of risk, while many countries still have restriction for the embryo NGS testing, or only 6 oocytes may give several blastocysts and they don't find reason to make NGS testing for the embryos. So that will give big chance to patient or the potential euploid oocyte and give better quality of euploid embryos. And one important thing is traceability for the donor egg banking. Of course, still human witnessing is important, and most of the egg bank or laboratories, they are doing a double witnessing. But still, for the egg banking, electronic witnessing system is a really important. Still, with the new advanced technologies, we can put RFID chip on the cryostraws, and we can use that for the determination of the exact egg donors and to avoid all risks and human mistakes. So if we talk about conclusions, efficiency of donor egg banking, so elective donor egg freezing may increase efficiency. Artificial intelligence-based morphological oocyte assessment may increase efficiency. So while, according to our studies, we directly see that while we use artificial intelligence-based, we have a better survival rate and better blastocyst rate from the different donor cycles. Meiotic spindle determinate donor egg freezing still may increase efficiency, while firstly, we can avoid micromanipulation damage risk during the cytoplasmic injection. And second, still we can determine the spindle and we find out a better euploid blastocyst rate while we determine the meiotic spindle. Electronic witnessing is very useful for egg banking to avoid any kind of human mistakes. Also, there is outcome difference between supplier clinic and customer clinic, while techniques and protocols is much more automized in the supplier clinic. There is no potential risk and egg damage with a frozen donor egg, which we use a biopsy of polar bodies. Egg donation program efficiency is correlated with egg donor efficiency using by the donor egg banks. So while if donor egg selection criteria is strict, we will always find a better quality of donor eggs. Genetically tested oocyte is advanced technology which may give more chance to patient or clinics to get euploid blastocyst outcome and a pregnancy rate. Polar body biopsy does not affect oocyte morphology or survival rate after the vitrification and thawing. Genetically tested oocyte has significantly better euploid blastocyst and implantation outcome. So while we try to publish our study, and we will give a more clinical data and for the clinical pregnancy rate and live birth rate. Chromosomal abnormality risk may decrease after the polar body NGS testing as well. Thank you very much for your time, and regards from beautiful Ukraine.
Well, excellent presentation, Birol. Thank you very much for this well, amazing data that you have presented. So you propose to us another level of excellence that is just a way of the normal quality controls and assurance, training, proficiency. You just presenting us, I mean, that we can either have a better performance by selecting the embryos, the oocytes with artificial intelligence. This is the idea.
Yeah.
So how long does it take to do all these determinations?
Actually, with artificial intelligence, morphological determinations so quickly, because it's software is working so active. Software has different sensors on the camera, and mostly for the 20 oocyte, let's say only 2 minutes, we can determine all measurements.
Okay, I see. Well, thank you very much. Really, I appreciate your excellent presentation and data. So, Peter, I think it's time to go for the Q&A.
Time for the Q&A, and I would like to ask all the presenters to turn on their microphone and camera and be part of this general conversation discussion. We have many questions. Unfortunately, we will not have time to go through all the questions. You know, some technical, some policy, some other type of questions. You know, and everybody, please chime in. You know, even if it's not directly asked from you, Kamal, if I may ask you to come back. Thank you so much. You know, one of the questions that that was asked, and that's maybe a little bit dangerous question, but it was asked that you freeze the eggs from a donor, then you send it to another clinic where there is the recipient, and let's say the outcome from this warming in that other clinic is not so good, at least not as good as they would hope. How to clarify what went wrong, you know, if it's on the freezing side, on the warming side, maybe the shipping. Maybe everybody can chime in. Wayne, can I start with you? How you do that?
Oops.
Why I bang my head against the wall many days.
Exactly.
It's a very difficult question and very hard one to answer. Usually if it's a shipping problem and temperature became an issue, usually we see very low or no survival. So that one is a little bit easier to test. Blastocyst outcomes, male factor can obviously be a contributing factor. So we do have a blastocyst guarantee in our programs. We do have a male factor component on that as well. So we do request a total motile count of 1 million or greater to rule out severe male factors. We do allow epididymal sperm or testicular sperm, but only in cases of obstructive azoospermia in our blast guarantee. So we do try and handle everything on a case-by-case basis and try and figure it out. Sibling lot analysis helps. Other performance of the donor helps, but I wish I had a more definitive answer, but it's always a challenge.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And the customers are always right.
Almost always.
Corey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's pretty much the same as Wayne said. You know, we have monitors on our tanks, so we can somewhat tell if there was trouble with shipping, but that doesn't always answer the questions. But same as Wayne, I beat my head against the wall lots of times trying to figure out what went wrong. We also don't allow testicular sperm, although Wayne might have a good point. If it's obstructive, there's the reason they have testicular sperm. That may be useful, but we also do the same things, trying to limit male factor by having a sperm requirement slightly higher than what Wayne has, but pretty much in the same neighborhood.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime on this one?
Peter, I think we have done very limited amount transfer of eggs between our 3 centers within the UK, and have not really detected a huge amount of deterioration in quality. Having said that, I think the numbers are small, and you guys and Maria and others, Corey and Wayne, I think you have much more experience. So I've been enjoying listening to your observations. I think that'll be very valuable as we go forward in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah, Wayne, you wanted to add something?
Well, we did do a study that was an ASRM poster last year with NYU, I'm sorry, with RMA of New York. And we looked at oocytes that were thawed in the location where they were frozen and sibling groups that were shipped, and we found no difference. So we feel very comfortable that shipping it. And I know, Peter, you had a study similar to this years ago that showed no ill effect of shipping. So we're pretty confident in shipping, but as Corey said, we do all we can to try and monitor it, but there's no absolutes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And one thing I'd like to add,
Corey,
we vet our clinics a little bit, so we have different levels of clinics. We'll sell to, well, don't want to say we'll sell to anyone, but to be a reference clinic for us, you have to have at least start guideline averages. So you have to be in line with those averages for warming and donor eggs. That helps a little bit. If we know the lab is a good lab, then we do the training in addition to it. All that helps, and it helps avoid some of those problems. At least know that we're working with good quality laboratories and technicians who know how to do the work.
Right. Maria, anything you want to say to that, or want to go
well,
on the question?
Well, our experience as a egg bank is different from the rest of the egg banks, because even though we have agreements with specific clinics in some countries in Europe, there are very few. So normally we distribute our gametes between EVRMA centers, but we follow the same policy. So we give the benefit of the doubt when the patient, the recipient doesn't have at least one blastocyst. We give another lot of eggs to repeat the cycle. This is our compromise with those centers. And if this happens in house, we repeat we look for another donation and we repeat the donation. So, and of course, there is the severe malfactor issue that may affect the blastocyst development potential. But yeah, we follow very similar things. I want to point out something about transportation. I don't know whether you have able to measure temperature of the tank or the cryo tank during air flights, or if the transport is through by car, or so we have observed that there are changes on temperature, and we were thinking about the possibility that this fluctuation of temperature may affect the survival of the oocytes, because as we know, we use the majority, cryotops like tips, and we were worried about this, the way we transport the oocytes. So most of the cases we prefer transportation by car instead of by air. But of course we can do it in Europe. If you want to go overseas, it's going to be a little bit difficult. But yeah.
Right.
A little harder for us. We do have a monitor that we put in the tanks. I said yes. To answer her question, we do have a monitor that we put in the tanks that monitors the temperature. There's a lot of monitors available. We just monitor temperature. I know we looked at some from FedEx, and they could actually tell you if the tank had fallen over or something happened. But to that point, there's really not much we can do when somebody's in the middle, or eggs are in the middle of the flight if the temperature goes bad. It's only a quality assurance or quality control issue that we look at to, make sure that the temperature has been maintained the full time until they are received at the receiving lab.
Right, but in principle, nobody is really worried about the transportation of the gametes, that something happens. I mean, it can happen, we understand it, because it's always a little bit risky, but in general, just because we're transporting gamete shipping from one clinic to the other, normally...
Yeah, it's not an issue normally. Yeah.
It's not an issue.
We're very, very comfortable. We see much less than 1% issue.
Okay, all right. Maria, what is your question that you would like to ask?
Let me see. We have a question for Dr. Kamal Ahuja. They're here from Gulam Behadun from UK. He asked, or she asked, what is the maximum number of recipients per egg donor in your clinic or in UK? I'm not sure whether this question is for the clinic of Kamal or in UK.
Well, Maria, thank you for that. I'm very happy to answer that. I think Dr. Bahadur is well known in the field, and I think the question he asked is very pertinent. So typically, it may be different from other clinics, but we tend to offer between 6 to 10 eggs per allocation for each donor. The greatest majority of the transactions involve 6 eggs. Occasionally, that goes up to 10. The average number of eggs we tend to have from a donor is between 12 to 14. So it's very rare that from a given donor cycle, we shall have more than 2 as a maximum. I think I would not know what your sort of own observations are, but that has not really changed very much over the years. Sometimes you have more eggs and you can allocate 10 and still have the possibility of bringing another one, but it's very rare for us to go up to 3 recipients.
Okay, thank you, Kamal. Well, there are other people in the among the panelists that want to share their experience.
Right. I just have a quick question to Birol. One of the audience is asking that what do you do with the eggs that don't make the appropriate grade? So I understand that you freeze it, but then after that, what happens?
Okay. Of course, like in Ukraine, there are a lot of surrogacy and egg donation, and we have quite many cases. So which is not choosing by the artificial intelligence, by the morphological assessment, they are going directly to fresh cycle. Mostly we are using that for quality 2 oocyte for fresh cycle, and quality 3 oocyte, which has really defect on the different part of the oocyte, we totally avoid them from cycle.
Okay, so thank you very much. Maria, your question?
Yeah, I saw one very interesting one for Corey Burke. There is a question, actually it's for everybody. It's with regards of the storage during the pandemic. If any one of us make a use this separate deworts for donors or, during the pandemic situation, I don't know whether you, because I didn't change my way of the storage. We use air dry banks, and we were happy with other viruses. We know that there is no cross-contamination, so I didn't change. I don't know about your experience.
No, we haven't changed anything. It's the same as we've always done. Yeah, no difference. And we store, we're using closed systems for storage, so there's really no. And we go back and forth all the time about contamination in tanks, and I think it's widely known, or most people agree that it doesn't happen that much. And so far, I don't see any evidence of the virus being something that we need to pay extra precaution to. But it's a great question. No, we're not doing anything different, though.
I would agree. We're using a closed system. We do everything we can to make sure that we're being as aseptic as possible. But beyond that, there's no other controls that we've added.
Yeah.
Right.
The same here. There's no difference really. I think what you said is absolutely appropriate.
Excellent.
Okay.
I do have a question to Birol, to you again. I really loved your presentation for many different reasons. I think it's really important to try to work out a way to get more information on the eggs before we freeze them. This is extremely important for the donor egg program, but it's also important, for fertility preservation patients. Do you think that other alternative measures like gene expression from cumulus cells or other things would help too, or where do you see this coming into a effective test in the future? You think in a few years' time we will have a more effective test, and what it will be, do you think?
So of course it's possible, but we are trying to use methods which can give us a result faster, because we are an egg bank. So we have selection of the donor from the different customers and clinics, and they have a limited time. While we should have always active frozen eggs from the different donor profiles in our egg bank. That's a time consuming. That's why, so we try to choose advanced technologies which will give us a quicker feedback. So that is the only point. Will be difficult to use such technologies as we are using a polar body NGS, for example, but okay, this has a special gap which we can use 4 or 5 days for NGS testing, and then they are already frozen one by one in each stroke. So when patient or clinic choose these oocytes, so we can just send them euploid oocyte easily. But if we try to analyze each part, like cumulus cells of gene expression and everything, of course, it will be time consuming and will be difficult from a perspective.
Thank you so much. Maria?
Well, I do have a question also for Birol. Sorry, Birol. It's with regards of the PP, the polar body biopsy. So we know that meiosis II happened in the IVF laboratory after fertilization. So once you discard the abnormal oocytes and you do fertilization, then you are not aware of the abnormalities during meiosis II. So that means that if meiosis I is okay, what normally is going to happen is that during meiosis II, the separation of the chromatids is going to be good. So factors, laboratory factors such as temperature or let's say oxygen or whatever is not affecting that much. This is what we can read from your experiments.
No, yes, still affecting. As I shared in our study, so still we have a difference with euploid oocyte, which we get aneuploid blastocyst, but it's not like a percentage of 40-50. So only for less than 10% of euploid oocyte give us aneuploid blastocyst. So of course that is a part of laboratory aspects. So embryologist techniques, media, or like a sperm factors also as well, male factors, still we cannot avoid that. But still a big matching between euploid oocyte and euploid embryos. Even on the meiosis I, when we find out euploid oocyte.
Okay.
All right, and I think even though that we have a fantastic discussions and still many questions, I think it's probably time to wrap up this fantastic webinar. Maybe one last questions. Maria, anything else that you feel that it's needed to be asked?
Let me check among the questions from the attendees.
Meantime, maybe I can ask a question that is partly technical and partly logistical. One of the viewers asked, is there a time that an egg shouldn't be used anymore from a donor? You vitrify the egg. It is a technical how long the vitrified eggs can be good, but it's also probably a question that after a few years, maybe the donor profile is not as attractive. Maybe the genetic report needs to be updated or whatever. So is there a policy about it? Do you retire eggs after a certain period of time? Kamal, you want to start?
I think there is a much from where I work at, I think there's a much more pressing problem, and that is with the HFEA as to how long the egg should be stored for. So there's a maximum limit of 10 years. Considerable pressure has been brought upon the HFEA. That's unreasonable. It's archaic, and it may change. So I think once that happens, we then begin to ask the questions which are very important as to how long the biological viability of frozen eggs may be sustainable. And if so, even if it is sustained, other things change around the providers of those eggs. I think those are very critical questions. And I have a feeling that this is something that's going to become more dominant. I don't have any view at the moment, but just share that I think at the moment we're just pressing for the 10-year limit to be raised so that the field is clear to ask the sort of questions that you're raising.
Right, excellent. Corey, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think he raises a good point. For cryos, we've only been in business, in the egg business, for about 5 years. So really, I don't think there's been time to age out too many of our eggs. But he asked an excellent question. We don't know how long the viability of eggs actually is. We do know it's longer than anybody's been storing them currently. But it's a great question, and I don't think I have much to answer that question with.
Okay,
it's good things to look into, and I would like to, I think in the future it's something we're going to look at a little more closely.
Any thoughts?
I think if I'm right, Anna Cobo make this study looking for survival rates and live rates of oocytes that has been banned for up to 5 years, and I think we didn't see any difference at all. I don't know after 5 years whether something can happen, but I don't know. Well, I do have a very interesting, I think it's a very interesting question. Maybe it's a little bit out of the scope of this session, but I think it's very important in terms of reporting activities. So we are, you as egg bank and I as an egg bank have the responsibility to have all the live births and going, live births and serious other reactions. So we need to, it's our responsibility and the government's responsibility to force us to give this information. In Europe, as a member states, we are forced to give this data to the Commission, to see how the serious other reactions, whether there is an imputability for donors, so we can have, so we should talk with the other recipients or the donor, or so there is many things that we around egg banking, or gamete banking, that we should not forget about. I don't know whether this issue can be addressed in other initiative, this session of the IVF initiative. But I think it's quite interesting. It's safety, it's quality, and this cannot be forgotten. Sorry.
I think I can speak for most of the egg banks here. When there's an adverse outcome, we hear about it very quickly. So those are reported very quickly. But yeah, we do. For our data, we do pursue, with the clinic or with the recipients for outcome data very doggedly. I think it's very important to try and get that data. But if something goes wrong, we hear about that pretty quickly. I'm sure everyone would agree with that.
Yeah, right. Absolutely agree. When something goes wrong, we hear about it almost immediately. I would kind of like the system that you have in Europe, that you're kind of forced to report, although I hate being forced to do anything. Just one of my personal things, but I think it'd be very beneficial to us if we had to report the outcomes more. We know that we get a lot more. With the egg donors, we're very similar to what Wayne gets. We get a high number of egg donor or egg clinics reporting back to us. The problem is on the sperm side. That's where we don't get information back. I think it's partially because in a clinic, if they're using sperm, they do an IUI, it takes, half hour to do the IUI, then they do the insemination, and then they don't think about following up with them 9 months later. I think that's where the biggest lag is. But in the UK or other places like that, they have to report back, and that would be somewhat beneficial to us. Although, Americans are kind of not in favor of being forced to do anything, so that's another issue that we have to deal with.
Right. Well, in Spain, we are trying to build up a registry for all the cycles. So everything, ideally, so far we are not done very well, but the ideal situation in the future is that all the clinics in Spain will put those data on a unique registry, so everybody will know everything about everything.
All right. I think it's time to conclude, and I leave you the microphone, Maria, in just a second. Again, unfortunately, not every questions we were able to ask. Like differences, between the different clinics. For instance, some clinics, especially in Europe, I think they are using all eggs from a donor to the recipient. While in the United States, it's typical, for instance, to divide the eggs from one donor that we receive between many different recipients. So partly because of cost and expense of the donor and other expenses. So there are many aspects that we didn't have the chance. Maybe in the future we can organize another about the egg banks. So Maria, you want to go ahead and start to
close?
slowly?
Yeah, of course. Goodbye to everyone. Thank you very much for for being with us, with sharing your ideas, your thoughts with us. Thank you for the attendees. I also don't want to forget the sponsor, the London Egg Bank, Donor Egg Bank Use, USA, Cryo International, and Ogin Egg Bank. Also, I want to thank people that are in the backstage. Thomas Elliott, Giles, Marianne, Sidfred. I cannot pronounce this name. But many people that are that thanks to them, this initiative are able to, this project is able to run. As we said, we are now in the 50th session. Probably in 50 more, you will be up to 100, session number 100. So thank you really to everyone for being so nice and share your ideas with all of us. Thank you very much.
Okay, and before you go, just a couple of remember great things like this was the 50th webinar, and we just started less than a year ago. It was the first one was in March 31st in 2020, when the pandemic started, and it's just great to have the whole community together and learn from each other. So we really appreciate it. Any attendees who would like to ask, or suggest topics that we would like to discuss, please go ahead and you can submit it. I especially want to thanks to Thomas, who is going to work on getting this webinar on the ivfmeeting.com website that you can watch it. I also wanted you to introduce a new initiative of the I3, which is the Asia Pacific chapter. That means that starting this Thursday, there will be webinars specifically to that region of the world. Because of the time zones, they have more difficulties to follow us. Although Stephen Flemings is here from Australia, which just means that he is waking up very early. But that will be a great initiative. And the first webinar is titled Digital Lab. And at Dubai time, it will be at 14:30. Delhi time, it will be at 16 hours. Sydney time, it will be 21:30. And in the UK, it's going to be 10:30 in the morning. And of course, here in our West World channel, we are continuing with our webinars, which is next Tuesday as usual, February 16, same time, same station, sessions 51, which is a sequel of reproductive biomedicine in space, the trip to the Mars. And moderators will be Max Cohen and Giles Palmer. Exactly, and great speakers, great topics. So I hope that you will join and we will see you there. And thank you again, Maria, and for all the presenters. Thank you and have a great evening.
Pleasure.
Maria, thank you all for such wonderful organization. And Peter, on such a high note, I think Mars is going to be quite a crowded place soon, huh?
Absolutely. The next Margarita is on the Mars.
I know. Thank you again and all the best. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.